Ooh, I wrote so tiny, I was so concentrated. Well, we started this whole business by talking about mythology in general and the part that it plays in the mysteries, where mythology is looked at as just about literal spiritual truth. Then we corrected, and we looked at how sometimes mythology reads just the opposite of the way things are. And then we spent a number of weeks looking at creation stories, going under the idea that what is involved in a creation story is involved in our creativity, even in our initiation. What we experience in ourselves when we create follows a formula that is just like the creation of the cosmos. Now we've been looking at mystery myths, which are myths that were used or are used by mystery schools for bringing the candidates for initiation to a state of consciousness where they can expand their consciousness and reach deeper and higher spiritual states of consciousness. First, we looked at Isis, Osiris, and Horus, and we took the mystery myth as recorded by Plutarch. And it was a very strange and curious kind of story with all kinds of little vignettes in. But that was probably, is claimed and probably is true, the most influential of all of the mystery myths, being that most of the other mystery myths which came later in time or in other cultures followed basically the idea of Isis, Osiris, and Horus, which probably didn't originate with the Egyptians. It probably originated with the Atlanteans coming out of Egypt, out of Atlantis and going to the Gobi land. Or it may well have come out of Ethiopia from the Gymnosophists who migrated there early on from the Indian Empire. Now that was the most influential one, and now we're going to look at the myth that is the most famous one, and it is the myth of Demeter and Persephone. And this myth was celebrated at mystery festivals for several thousand years. And many Greeks and later Romans and other noble people from other parts of the world, though it wasn't only noble people, sometimes it was even slaves that were initiated, took part in the celebration at Eleusis every year. And so that's over 2,000 years of celebrations. Yes, it's a place that's northwest of Athens, about 13 miles. And it started out just like Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, as it took place in the woods outside of Athens, probably a sacred grove. And because they had sacred groves that had certain powers that came out of the earth and were associated with certain trees. Sometimes they were artificial. Sometimes in geometric positions they would put 12 or 13 trees in a circle, depending on whether they were making it solar or lunar months. And then they would have a tree of each specific species that needed to get the right relationship of force to each other, and would do things that way. Many people had their lives changed by the Eleusinian mysteries. And almost without exception, in fact there is no recorded exception, but I find it hard to believe that there wouldn't be one exception, but almost without exception people lived better lives as a consequence of having experienced the mystery initiation. Though not all of them experience it at the same level. We're going to talk a lot about that next week, or the next time we meet. We're going to only tell the myth tonight and then go through it a second run through and do little side trips. And then next week we're going to talk about the mysteries themselves as they were celebrated, as much as is known of them. And then we're going to look at it on 3 or 4 different levels of interpretation. In fact, we may take the classic 4 Platonistic levels of interpretation of a myth. The Platonists had 4 levels that they standardly looked at myths at. But at any rate, the myths were so profound in their moral influence that they had almost no detractors. Some people made fun of them, but it was all lighthearted because they were, because they were so profound and so many influential people, and not only influential people in terms of political power or financial power or something like that, but people who by their character were strong. One of the only people not to be initiated into them was Socrates. And he did, and that some people feel that that's why he was called a heretic. I don't agree with that. The modern mystery students say the reason Socrates was not initiated into the mysteries is because he was a medium, and mediums were not allowed to be initiated into the mysteries, at least on the deeper levels. Among the people who had positive things to say about the mysteries was the best type to look at, and that is people who were skeptical. And the skeptic had something to say about them. Diogenes, if you know who Diogenes was, he was the original cynic. He founded the school of cynicism, and he about dressed in rags, and he lived in a barrel inside the Agoria, is that how you pronounce it? I think it's the Agoria, the marketplace. And he just had all kinds of outrageous things to say. Like there's a famous story of him. There are all kinds of famous stories. One is that a boy and his father were going through the square, and I think the boy, being a spoiled, rich young brat, spit on Diogenes. So Diogenes walks up to him and slaps his father. Famous story. Another one is that Plato, going through the Agoria, was wearing, he had this majestic purple robe, and Diogenes walks up to him and said, "I have stepped on Plato's pride." And Plato says, "But aren't you proud that you did it?" But this is what Diogenes had to say about the Eleusinian mysteries. He said, a thief who has been initiated into the mysteries stands a better chance in this life and in the next, if there is such, than an honest man who hasn't been initiated. And if a skeptic says that, it's really big time stuff that you're dealing with. So, if the skeptics believe that way, just think of how the celebrants believe. Throughout all of history, all of the mysteries in all cultures, all of the right-hand mysteries, that is, have been highly revered for their influence at moral redemption and spiritual regeneration. It's universal in becoming better people and worshiping the divine and uniting with it. It's what it's all about. What's his name? The Russian, Dostoevsky, how did he say it? God is what it's all about. We won't be very thorough about the discussion of the Eleusinian mysteries for several reasons. And primary among those reasons is that very little is known about the mysteries in details. For the last 4,000 years, it's been one of the best kept secrets on the face of the earth, despite the fact that hundreds and thousands of people passed through the Eleusinian mysteries. None would disclose, or if they did so in a very veiled way. And we're going to see that the disclosures were almost as mythical as the myths celebrated in the mysteries. That's because, like most of the ancient mysteries, even up until the beginning of this century with Freemasonry, disclosure of secrets was done under the penalty of death. So people just didn't talk about it. Another reason we're not going to talk a lot about the mystery celebration is because it's so vast. We'd have to go into so much Greek culture and everything involved with it. It's a very technically intricate thing. You read through these books and all the information. I just don't want to sift through all of that, and even in a modified rendition. And another reason we're not going to do that is because the philosophy is no longer appropriate to our times. And we're going to discuss that in the next meeting when we get to the highest level of talking about the myth. So we're going to tell the story, and tell the story with the side trips. And then the next time we meet, we're going to talk about the public celebration, which were pretty wild. And then we're going to discuss it on different levels. Now, last time when we talked about Isis, Osiris, and Horus, we looked at the mystery myths from different points of view. We looked at it from the physical body and from astronomy and such like that. But this time we're going to take the same myth and go take it on different levels, because on different levels it has different meanings. All right. Having gotten all of that out of the way, we're ready to hear the story. And we note that there are a lot of similarities between this and the Isis story, because there was the cultural influence. It involves wet. I went into the stash and got a new piece of chalk. It involves Demeter. And Demeter means barley mother. And it involves, well, we'll bring up the other ones. In Roman, it's Ceres, which we know very well from our word cereal. When we eat breakfast cereal every morning, we're eating the food of Ceres. Demeter is not only, it was corn mother, not just barley mother, but barley mother most especially. Well, in the European context, any grain they called corn. They don't call what we call corn, we don't call that, in Europe they call that maize. Yeah. Yes. And like the mysteries of Isis, Osiris, and Horus, but with different cultural viewpoint, she is the son of Cronus and Rhea. Probably heaven and earth, but we won't go into that. And she's part of a big family. The eldest of the family is Hestia. And then Demeter. And then Hera. And then Hades. And then Poseidon. And then Zeus. The first 5 members of the family were because of a prophecy that Cronus would be overthrown by one of his children. The first 5 members were swallowed immediately upon birth. Cronus ate all of his children. He swallowed them whole. That's an interesting myth in itself. I don't know if we'll go into that or not, but it's equally as interesting as Isis and Osiris copulating in the womb. But in the case of Zeus, when Zeus was born, Rhea was just so sick and tired of this whole business of losing all of her progeny that she gave Kronos a great big stone wrapped in swaddling clothes, and he swallowed the stone, and Zeus grew up to be very powerful and overthrew him. But Demeter, unlike many of the Greek gods and goddesses, was of a very gentle nature. Nothing harsh about her at all. She did very, very few hard things. But she was also quite earthy and lustful. In fact, she was called the goddess of the cornfield for fertility rites in the cornfield. And she was also called the initiator of brides and grooms, because she was the goddess that taught them what they probably already knew since they were children. But despite the fact that she was lusty and earthy, she never was married. She was one of the only ones of the elder gods that was never married. She had a lot of lovers. Oh, after Zeus overthrew his father, he cut the stomach open and got them all out. They all came out alive, which is a very big myth, which is the famous one that the Platonists, I believe it is the Platonist, not Plotinus, but Proclus. I believe it's Proclus that interprets that myth on several levels. There are so many of in the classical times, those very deep people. One of her early liaisons was with her brother Zeus. She got lusty, and she had two children. One of them was Cor. Sometimes you see it with a K, sometimes with a C. And the other was Aeacus. And there were two children from their dalliances. They weren't twins, but they stayed together with each other quite a while. Another one of her lovers was Iasus, who was one of the Titans. And it so happened that the Adam and Eve had several Adam and Eves in the Greek stories. One set was Deucalion and Pyrrhia, and the other one was Cadmus and Harmonia. And since Cadmus and Harmonia, at least along the Promethean tradition, were the first humans, when they got married to each other, there was a grand celebration. And at this grand celebration, all the gods and goddesses attended. Gods and humans were, just spent the time in the earth together. And this is when Demeter took this tremendous fascination for Iasus, and they got so hot and bothered that they walked right out of the wedding into a rainy, muddy, thrice-plowed cornfield. And they copulated ecstatically, and they came back, and they were a sight, and Zeus noticed it, and he got very, very jealous and upset about it, so he took the thunderbolt and he killed Iasus. But out of that union came Plutus. Not Pluto, but Plutus, where our word Plutarchy comes from. Plutus in the Greek means wealthy. This was the sort of a lower level god of wealth. And there's another story that we're going to come up with along the way, and that is during her sorrow when her daughter is missing, she's traveling all over, and her other brother gets lustful toward her, Poseidon, and he just bothers her, and she just will have nothing to do with him because she's grieving over the loss of her daughter. And so what she does is she goes into this farmer's pasture and turns herself into a mare. And the Poseidon, who among all of the gods had produced more ugly and what was it? Poseidon and Venus. He had a what was her name? What did they call her? Aphrodite. Poseidon had to deal with Aphrodite that was extremely lustful with her, and that out of that union came Priapus, who was sort of a short, ugly creature that had enormous genitals and was worshipped for that for centuries. But in this case, he changed himself into a stallion, and among the Greek gods, the men always get what they want. And they united, and out of that, 2 children came. One was called Despoina, which means mistress, and also a wild horse called Arion. The reason the horse was a wild horse was because she was so angry about being abused by her own brother when she was just not in no state to be amorous at all, that ever after she became known as Demeter the Fury. In fact, that's where our word furious comes from, is from the fury of Demeter, and it has to do like with raging types of horses. In general, Demeter has quite a bit to do with the belly. I don't know why. First of all, she spent those long periods of time in the belly of her father. And then there was the story of Eryxithon. She had these sacred groves in various places. And this Eryxithon wanted to enlarge his fields, and he goes in and he starts cutting down the grove without asking her permission. And she appears to him, but she appears as a mild-mannered human being and asks him to desist. And he refuses, and he goes on his way. In fact, he's one of the only people that did not did not pray or anything before plowing the fields. And if you didn't pray to Demeter before plowing the fields, that was considered sacrilege. But he was trying to despoil her grove, and then she just got very angry with him and gave him a curse that he would have a hunger such that his belly would never be full. And he was a wealthy man to begin with, and he ate and ate and he ate all of his wealth up, and he killed all of his herds and everything else. And eventually he became a beggar, eating filth and offal and things like that, and that was his curse. This is one of the only times that she was really angry. On the other hand, there is the story of Pandarius, and Pandarius is a man that, at her behest, stole the 2-headed golden dog from Zeus and brought it to Earth, and she was happy for that. I think he even killed it, if I'm not mistaken. And that was the vengeance for Iasus being killed. And she rewarded him. It was a great reward. I don't know. She said, "You will never have any belly aches." And for as long as he lived, he never had a belly ache. So there's all kinds of belly things to have. She was then basically a very, very mild and soft goddess, never hurt anyone. And she was pretty joyous and lusty and earthy until she lost her daughter, Kor. Kor means maiden. She changes her name later on, or her name is changed for her later on. What happens is she was an innocent young maiden, and she was out picking flowers. And Hades, her uncle, from both sides, maternal and paternal uncle, fell in love with her. And Hades goes to Zeus and says, "May I marry your daughter?" Zeus is in a pinch because he knows Demeter would never allow it, and Demeter is his sister. On the other hand, his brother, who is the Lord of the Dead, is just about equal in power to him. And he didn't know which way to answer. No matter which way he answered, he would be in trouble. So he answered something to the effect saying, "I can neither grant nor refuse your request." Sounds a lot like Kuwait, doesn't it? The weekend before, the week before, the United States ambassador told the Iraqi ambassador that, well, we can't say yes or no to you. That's your business. So Hades realizes the position that Zeus is in, and he takes things into his own hand, and he comes charging up out of the earth, and he's got this gold chariot, and it's driven by at least 4 beautiful black horses, and he comes charging up and grabs Persephone, clasps her to him, and takes her back down, Chlor, and takes her back down into the underworld. Now, it's not known exactly where this happened. Some people think it was that it took place in Attica, and some people think it took place in Sicily, and other people think it took place in Crete, and some people think in Pisa, and some people think in Lernia. Usually they say Eleusis is where it happened. But at any rate, it is that she was near a stream and she was picking flowers. Nobody knows exactly when it happened either. There are 2 schools of thought, some 3 schools of thought actually. Some people think it was in springtime and she was picking daffodils. Shakespeare is of that school. Remember, he says, "This is daffodils." I forget which play it's in. The other school of thought, the other 2 schools of thought think that it's in fall. And one of the fall schools of thought thinks that it was poppies that she was picking, and the other fall school thinks that it was autumn daffodils that she was picking. But apparently nobody actually saw the rape. Though Hecate, the wise old witch, the goddess of witches, the old crone, heard a rape was all she heard. And what happens is Demeter becomes extremely grief-struck. And for 9 days, she goes all over the earth looking for clues. And finally, after the nasty affair with Poseidon as a horse, she comes to Eleusis. And at Eleusis there is King Celeus and Queen Metanira. Now, seeing as she had just born this colt, as well as having born the nymph from this union, she was still in milk. She appeared as a human. She didn't show her full godly glory. And she was still very sad, and she was invited by the king and queen to be a wet nurse to the newly born Prince Demophoon. See, this is very similar to the Isis story, but just a little bit different. But she's so sad, she discharges her duties, but she's very, very sad. And the king has a lame daughter. And the lame daughter tries to cheer her up. And she tries to cheer her up with dirty poems, poems that have all sorts of naughty ribaldry in them. And that doesn't do it at all. So there is the old dry nurse that is there, and her name is Baubo, B-A-U-B-O. Now there are two variations to this story. First, one place that there's always agreement is that Baubo gave her a glass of water, barley water, with mint in it, and gave it to her to drink. The other story is that Baubo did something to get her attention and break it and make her laugh. One version of it is that her son, Aeacus, was under her skirts, and that she made a noise like she was groaning. This is an old woman, and she lifts up her skirt, and then Aeacus jumps out and grabs his mother and kisses her, and to some extent that breaks her grief. The other story is that she shaved her pubes, and that she lifted up her dress after making the groaning sounds, and Demeter looked at it and was laughing, and then Aeacus broke out. Interesting story. We'll get to some interpretations of all of that. But while she's drinking the barley water, one of the other young princes, she's drinking, gulping it down very rapidly, and one of the other young princes says, how greedily you drink. And so you're not supposed to say something uncomely to a goddess, and she was drinking to quench her sorrow. If you take a nature interpretation of the myth, I think it has something to do with the spring rains preceding the coming of spring. But she gazes at him and turns him right into a lizard, and he scampers off and spends the rest of his life as a lizard. Interesting, see what happened with in one case, this case it's a gaze, and in the case of Isis, it was a scream that turned him into stone. Remember that? He died, the one child that went with her. She decides to make it up to him, and so she takes the young prince that she is wet nursing, and at night when nobody is around, she takes and she holds him over the fire, and she's going to burn all of the mortality out of him. He's going to become an immortal. While doing that, one of the princesses comes in, and Metanea is her name, and she comes in and disrupts and breaks the whole spell, and Demophoon cries and dies right at that moment. And then King Celeus is beginning to see her as a liability rather than a helper around the house. It's already cost him 2 princes. So what happens is he's starting to feel as much grief, and then she reveals herself as the goddess, and she says, I will recompense you beyond everything you have lost. And you have 3 sons left, and they will be rewarded very highly. The 3 sons are Triptolemus, who is a cattle herd, and Eumolpus, who is a shepherd, and Eubulus, who is a swineherd. And each had their herds out on the plain on the day that Persephone was raped, and Triptolemus reports that he had seen a man. He couldn't see the face of the man, but he saw a man with a golden chariot and black steeds racing off with a woman held clasped to his breast. And he took the girl into a chasm into the ground. In fact, the ground opened up for him to come out, and when it opened up, Eubulus lost his swine. They went down into the hole and they were lost for good. And the princes, at the loss of both the swine and of the beautiful woman, all wept. And so they told this story to Demeter. And so Demeter goes to Hecate, and this sort of confirms the time that Hecate heard the words, a rape, a rape. And the two of them together go and see Helios. Helios is the Titan on the same level as Cronus that is associated with the sun, and he's called Old Helios, who knows all and sees all. Just like later on this title was given to Apollo. When Apollo overcame the great serpent Pythias, it took him for a whole year he fought with the serpent, and after he overcame the serpent he became Apollo Pythias, who sees all and knows all, and that was when Helios was retired. And everything is confirmed. And then Demeter takes her grief really certain, because now she knows her daughter is gone, and her daughter is gone to the worst place in the world, or beneath the world, into Tartarus. And she just wanders the face of the earth, and she grieves so much that she does not allow the trees to bear fruit, and gradually all of the plants are dying. And if the plants die, that's a major interruption in the food chain, the whole biological chain of evolution, and it's going to be curtains for it all. So Zeus has to do something. He realizes that if he doesn't do something, he will have no subjects. So the first thing he does is he sends Iris down to earth. And Iris is the goddess of dawn, and she's the gentler messenger. And he brings all kinds of gifts to Demeter, hoping to cheer her up so that she can do her duty with keeping the earth alive. And no go. She's firm in her grief. Nothing's going to happen. Next, he takes the bigger messenger, Hermes, the only messenger who will actually go to Tartarus. In Tartarus, he delivers a message to Hades that says, if you don't let Kor go, we're all doomed, because we will have no subjects. For a while you'll have a lot of people coming in, but not for very long. And then Hermes goes up to Demeter, and with the message from both Zeus and from Hades saying, Kor is yours, conditional to her not having eaten any of the food of the dead. So what happens is Kor has refused even a crust of bread, and has taken nothing from the table of Hades. So Hades tells her, you're free to go. And as she's going, she's getting on the chariot to be taken into the upper world. Asclepius, who is a gardener down in Tartarus, says, oh no, that's not so. I saw her go into the garden and break open a pomegranate and take out 7 seeds and eat the 7 seeds. And he said, I'm ready to bear witness to that. And so by this time, Kor is already in the upper world, and Demeter is both overjoyed and grief-stricken, thinking she's going to have to lose her daughter for good. And she remains adamant that she will not allow any plants, any life to live on the earth. And she stays there weeping, and Zeus is stumped. He doesn't know what to do. And so finally he goes back to Mama Rhea, and she works out a compromise between her children, Hades, and Demeter. And the compromise has 3 parts. 1, that 9 months of the year, Kor is to live in the upper world. 3 months of the year, she is to live in the underworld, and her name is supposed to be called Persephone. Something like, I think that means bringer of doom. Or bringer of destruction. So she is to reign as the queen, and the third part is that somebody has to watch to make sure that this compact is kept at all times. And the third part is that Hecate, the queen of the witches, who goes both into Tartarus and into the upper worlds, watches over and sees for time immemorable that the whole compromise is kept. And Demeter leaves Elysus to go back to the heaven, and before she does, she leaves a whole pile of gifts. First of all, to the whole house of Celeus, she teaches them all her mysteries and teaches them how to worship her. Asclepius, the man who rotted, the gardener in the garden of Tartarus, she has a double curse for him. First, he is put into a hole in the ground, and a stone is put over, and he stays there for a long, long, long time. And eventually, when the stone is removed and he's taken out of there, then he's turned into a short-eared owl. And that's his fate for the rest of history, is to be an owl. Some of the other people that helped her out and that were pleasant to her when she spent the 9 days wandering the earth, the Phoenicians, she gave them all kinds of seed grains so that they could grow grains, but on the condition that they never grow beans. One of them did and died and was given a shrine. Cephasus, another one of the people who was helpful to her, she gives him a fig tree and teaches him how to culture figs. Is it getting too hot in here? Oh, okay. And finally, Triptolemus, the cattle herd that reports the rape and has seen it all, she gives him a cart that's drawn by serpents. And she teaches him how to plow, and she gives him the ability to teach the art of agriculture, and he goes throughout all of Elysus and other places in Greece and teaches people agriculture. And that is how it goes. That's the end of the story. That then forever on, the cycle continues. That for 3 months of the year, that the earth becomes very dead and barren when the life is taken into the underworld, and Persephone reigns as queen of the underworld. Her character is very greatly changed when she's queen of the underworld. She has a hardened kind of look about her, and she's very, very tough after that. So Persephone, she gets changed from the maiden into the bringer of destruction, or the queen of death. That's the whole story. Now we'll go through the story all over again. Ceres is barley mother, in that all of the grains represent a state that is sort of like a neutral state in our in the food that we eat. On the one hand, many of the seeds are high protein. Like if you take nuts, for example, they're highly protein. On the other hand, at the other extreme of the food that we eat, the sweet food is found in the fruit. But the middle path, or the central path, is associated with the grains. Rice, for example, the claim about rice is because it grows underwater for part of its life, that it represents an early state of humanity, like when we lived under the Atlantean fog, underwater, and we became very subjective. And the claim is that people who eat a lot of rice, it has something that provokes a mystical nature in them, but it's a kind of a passive mystical nature because of that underwater kind of quality. The 4 grains that we commonly use are associated with the 4 elements. There's oats is associated with fire. You know that when you say a horse is feeling its oats, it's very spirited and very driven. Barley is associated with air. We'll come back to that. Rye is associated with water. And wheat, glutinous wheat is associated with earth. We wheat eaters, I'm not a big wheat eater. I'll eat bread, but my favorite, I like the fire. I like the fire and water. I love rye. Barley is associated with, this is spirit. Fire is associated with spirit. Earth is associated with matter. Water is associated with emotion. And air is associated with intellect. And it is the intellect that connects the spirit with the more, what it would be called, the animal soul. And so the intellect, or eating rye, is associated with the intelligent culture, agriculture, like there's pisciculture, agriculture, the culturing that is done in an intelligent, controlled way, in a human way. The definition of a human is a thinking being, and the ability to apply the intellect to our work in the world is what is indicated by her as being barley mother. And it is thinking, it's not just pure thinking, it's thinking that is associated with the world. It's not something that runaway thinking. Okay, so we have another heaven and earth story with Kronos and Rhea. We won't go into that, but I want to look just a little bit. We're going to have next year probably, we're going to talk about hierarchies of divinities. But this is a really interesting order to note, the birth of the children of Kronos and Rhea. In the first place, all of the women are born first, and the sons are born later. And all of them are born bottom up. That is to say, Zeus was associated with the underworld, Poseidon was associated with the sea, he's the Neptune of the Greeks, and Zeus was associated with heaven. Hestia is the goddess of the heart, and the goddess of earth itself is associated with the physical earth. Demeter is associated with the watery or living earth, and Hera is associated again with the heaven or the atmospheric earth. So what we're saying is, I was just blown away when I saw this. It's really beautiful the way, just in the order of children, like the psychoanalysts would really love this, especially if they could get away from everything is psychology and get into something spiritual. The fact that the women are born first, or the receptive elements, this is just the way it happens in evolution. We have to have the forms first. We have to have the vehicles of experience, and after we've had the experience, then the directive and active creative powers, which are associated with the masculine divinities, because they are the doers, then they can be born. Okay, that's just a little sideline. It just fascinated me. You gathered that this is storytelling, not just me telling the story, but the explanations of the story in this, would be different tomorrow if I did them again, but it is free association, or hopefully spiritual free association. Okay, so we have the earth, the vehicles of experience first, and then the drivers of experience, and then they all work from the bottom up, from the earth up to heaven. It's sort of like the evolution, the stage of evolution that we're in. We begin at the earth and work back up to the heavens. There's another stage where we came down into the earth, and we're going to be talking a lot about that the next time. Okay, the whole experience, we don't need to talk much about the watery earth or the life-bearing earth, because we know that everything that lives, even things that are like those little stones that grow in the surface of the desert, I don't know if they're really not stones. You know what I'm talking about? Those plants that look like a stone. Have you ever seen those? Oh my goodness. You've seen, they were a fascination for a while as house plants. You look at them and they look like the surface of a stone, and they're really a plant. Everything, even those things, even lichens, has to have water to live. And that lively water, that connection between the physical form and the spiritual worlds comes in through the ethers, and the ethers associate themselves with the earth and living things in the earth through the water. So Demeter is associated with that. Again, Demeter was associated with the belly, so again with Cancer, water of life, fresh, running, moving water. It's a cardinal kind of water. But she had all of these associations with the belly. She is also associated with the mysteries in another way. We'll never get a chance to go into this, but it's a little sidelong thing. When she was invited to the, who was it? It was, we just talked about the myth. Oh my goodness. Was it Tantalus that served up his children? Or was it Ixion that served up his children? And all of the gods and goddesses, he had this banquet, and he served up his own son, roasted his own son and served him to the gods, and the only one that ate any was Demeter, because she was abstracted, because she was grieving over Persephone. See, this is a funny thing about this. All these things occur along the way. And what she does is when he's restored to life, the gods restore him to life, and he's given where she bit into his shoulder, he's given a solid ivory shoulder. But it's not an ivory that comes from elephant tusk. It's one it's porpoise ivory. You're familiar with the symbol of the myth of the boy riding on a porpoise? That there are chosen people that are chosen by porpoises. You never know that? It still happens to this day. I've seen it in the newspaper that a person will fall in the water, in shark-infested water, and, sharks themselves are curious. They'll only go for certain people. You can have 20 people in the water, and this has happened already. The Navy has written books on sharks. And these 20 people will be ringing around one person that the shark is after. And the shark won't go after any of them, but it'll bang into them trying to get at the person that it wants in the center of that ring. But in some cases, people fall into shark-infested waters, and they get saved by porpoises, because the porpoises just come in great numbers, and they drive the sharks away, butt into them and drive them away. And it often happens that, there's something about the porpoises that they represent this very highly intelligent, benign type of Piscean character. And what happens is that somebody, a sea captain or a sailor, will fall overboard, and instead of drowning in the ocean, he'll be picked up and carried on the noses of porpoises and brought to land. That happens every few years. Within the last 5 years, I've seen a case of that in the newspaper. Not out of the tabloids, in a real newspaper. That this is the story of the boy and the dolphin, and it's like what this meant to the Greeks in the way they understood this, and this meant that there were certain chosen people who were to be saved, and these same chosen people were the ones who were ready to be initiated. But that's neither here nor there. So core is Eve before the fall. Persephone is Eve after the fall. This is a description of the two sides. Every time that we're reborn into a masculine or a feminine body, we relive either the experience of the divine assertion or of the divine imagination and receptivity. And both of those spiritual powers, either assertion or reception, has different qualities to them, some of which are pleasant and positive, but there are also pitfalls. And the quality of innocence versus the quality of the tough, hard woman is something that every woman has to go through, has to experience that in growing up, just like men have to be assertive without becoming bullies. And there are things in those kinds of experiences. And when we see somebody who has changed name and changed character, it isn't really a change of character. It is a responding to something that was always there in the first place. After Hades takes her, or even before Hades takes her, and Zeus has conflicting values, especially if you are a king. And Zeus was basically the king, the chief of all of the divinities. You have to make hard decisions. Your decisions, you have to say, they are as though they affect everyone. In the ancient world, the people watched what happened to the king, and the king, in a way, was sort of like a group spirit for his kingdom. And whatever he did, he brought that whole quality upon the kingdom. And therefore, experience is much accelerated being in that position. And so the conflict of values, do I give my daughter to my brother, or what would I do with my sister? This is the thing that we have every day. To be or not to be, which do I do? And what happens is Zeus makes no decision. He says, I can't do this, but I can't stop this either. So he has neither done one thing nor the other, and from a spiritual point of view, making no decision or doing nothing is the same as making a decision. Because if you don't do that, then the forces like Hades, if you become immobile and responsibility is incumbent upon you and you don't fulfill your responsibility, what happens then is whoever has the greatest power takes over, and that's what it is. So all of our character, what I'm trying to say is, we build character by doing things and by receiving. We are compound. We are receptors and we are transmitters. And there is a negative and a positive side to both. To not do and to not be receiving is a negative formation of character. And to do when the time is ripe, not ripe to do, is sort of the parallel going the other direction. Okay. Now we come into things, like when we start getting into fairy tales, assuming we have, after this section, after the Demeter section, we're going to look into Dionysius, Zagros, Bacchus, and Orpheus. And that'll be the last session that we have on mystery myths. And then we're going to go into heroes and heroines. And the first heroine, we're going to start taking fairy tales. And we're going to probably take East of the Sun and West of the Moon. If you'll notice, the time frame in all of this is funny. So when nobody knows, the time and space become, in the spiritual worlds, take on different values. So that nobody knows where Kor was abducted. It could have been Italy, it could have been Crete, it could have been almost anywhere. And there's a legend in every one of those places that that's where it was. Because the place, when we're dealing with things in mythology, we're dealing with things on a cosmic scale. And the place is the whole earth. We'll see next time we get together. It's the whole northern hemisphere. So you can't really say that it is just one particular place. You have to think differently when you look at things with regard to the spiritual worlds. Like if you were part of a creator of Mount Etna, when you die, you will have an experience of being at Mount Etna because you participated in all of that. And we, even though when we're limited to this little kind of a body, that's a very great state of limitation. But really, our true spiritual nature is earth-wide, and the earth is as much of our body as we are. When you say Mother Earth, they mean that very, very literally. The same thing with the time. Nobody knows exactly the time. But the flowers, all of the flowers mentioned, the daffodils and the poppies, are all narcotic. They are all soporific. That is, they sedate you. They put you to sleep. And they put you into a distorted dreaming state. And so this myth is saying that, the plucking of flowers, in a symbolic sense, and it's a very true sense, the flowers come before the fruit, and before the fruit withers up to become seed, the state before the pollination, the whole plant is innocent, but the flower is the most innocent. It is the attractive, the most beautiful creation of the plant, but that is still innocent of any kind of generation. And so when it says the maiden, who herself represents innocence, is picking flowers, that means that there is a state of consciousness that is innocently enjoying and appreciating the beauties of the earth. Okay. We won't go any much more into all of these details. There's a lot of them. When she's abducted, only Hecate knows about it. Hecate literally means 100. And in the same way that there was a spiritual king and a Tanist who was a material king, each of them lived a half a year. In some schools, they changed kings every 7 years. They changed spiritual kings every 7 years. And the old king was struck by lightning. This is again the Zeus thing. I don't know how they managed to I guess it was symbolically acted out that the king was struck by lightning. But that turns out to be 7 years and some months, if you take, there are 13 new moons in a year, and Hecate represents the moon, and it represents the lunar month, and so there's something about this that is showing a cycle. Remember, now this is a mystery myth. This is not just a story. It's trying to tell about a cycle of something that runs every 7 years, because there are different levels of initiation and different levels of preparation. So at any rate, Kor is abducted and taken into the underworld, and Persephone and Demeter grieves and wanders for her for 9 years. We all know, and we're going to talk about a lot about this the next time, that there are 9 lesser mysteries. And each of these 9 lesser mysteries have to do with liberation from the human state. Not only liberation from the physical body, but liberation from the earth itself. It has also to do with coming into the earth itself in terms of creation. So that there are then 9 stages. Let's take the taking of Kor into the underworld. It starts with the Milky Way. According to the Pythagoreans, this is the ladder of stars. And then she passes over the sea. There's another variant of this story where Demeter is carried over the sea. And the sea is ruled by Saturn. This whole part of the zodiac here, if you're going forward from about here to here, is called the sea, and it's ruled by Saturn and Neptune. And Saturn, to the Greeks, especially to the Platonistic Greeks, was associated with water. And you go down the step that is Jupiter, and you go down the step that is Mars, and the step that is Sun, and then the step that is Venus, and then the step that is Mercury, and then the step that is Moon, and then you have everything that's sublunary, which is the Earth. So between the Earth and heaven is the ladder of the stars that has souls ascending and descending. And so there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stages between earth and heaven. This is the way the Platonists and the Pythagoreans in their mystery school treated the 9 days of suffering of Demeter. We'll talk a little bit more about that next time when we're talking about the mysteries themselves. Again, she spends all of this time in grief. Mind you, now, this is the same sort of thing. We're talking about initiation. We're saying that the 3 stages of initiation are enormous grief because you have to experience your past. It's, we're going to see all 3 major kinds of grief. This is probably the major kind of grief. In the case of Isis, she loses a husband. In the case of Orpheus, he loses a wife. But in the case of Demeter, the thing that causes more grief than anything else is the loss of a child. This is what the myth has built right into it, the greatest kinds of experiences that human beings have. The greatest grief that we have is the losing of someone dear to us. Because you can't hope to cleanse your soul if you have half-hearted feelings of remorse. You have to have feelings that are intense and that indeed neutralize all of the intensity of your desires that produce the events that are called sins or virtues in the first place. And that cleansing comes from an enormous feeling of grief. And so the Greeks in their mystery schools chose to say that this is like the grief of a mother losing her daughter. In fact, I've talked to doctors that have practiced for 30, 40 years and have seen a lot of deaths. And the hardest death to take for the survivor is the death of a parent losing a child, especially a mother losing a daughter. Because I believe that the mother, having the lunar influence, it has more of the earthly influence and is much more associated with the carrying on of the biological activity, especially because there's that intimate tie even after out of the womb with the passing of milk and such like that between mother and daughter. And for that line of succession, that continuance, that biological continuance to be broken would cause the deepest kind of grief. So that's what happens. She grieves, and she grieves very, very deeply. All right, now we come to some other thing. That's what cleanses. We're talking about an initiatory thing. We have to live every part of this myth. We cannot come to the glory of Triptelemus, Triptelemus, I guess is how you pronounce it. We cannot come to the glory of Triptelemus as being the king of agriculture and world teacher unless we pass through all of these other stages. We have to go through the grief of Isis. And toward the end of these 9 days, she has this affair with Poseidon. Now this is something, have you ever read Cupid and Psyche? Cupid and Psyche is an enormous, it's something like, I think it's something like 10,000 pages long. It's called The Metamorphosis. It's by Apuleius. The Metamorphosis is the whole thing. Cupid and Psyche is one of the stories. And Cupid and Psyche, the Metamorphosis is called the Golden Ass of Apuleius, but the classical name for it is the Metamorphosis. Not Ovid's Metamorphosis, which is just about his body, but not quite. All it is, it's a story of a man who fools around with magic and gets turned into a donkey. And he goes through all of these travails of one kind or another. And eventually one of the last things is he has to copulate with a woman at the end of it all. And just the last minute before that, this is going to be in an arena before thousands of people. And at the last moment before that, Isis saves him. You see, Lucian of Apuleius was literally an initiate of both Iris, the mysteries of Isis and Osiris, and in the Golden Ass of Apuleius are the best descriptions that we have of the myths of Isis and Osiris. It even talks about we who have seen the midnight sun, meaning that he's been initiated to be a seer, that he can see the sun right through the earth at midnight. It's quite a thing. But in the Egyptian myths, the donkey was associated with typhoon. In this case, there is the horse, but even it's not clear in the mysteries of Elysius whether they used a horse or a donkey. Now, what happens to Bottom the Weaver in A Midsummer Night's Dream? He gets turned into an ass. And he also is he falls in love and is supposed to unite with the queen. And she falls in love with him. It's the same story. What I'm trying to tell you is that the embarrassment of the experience of the full feeling of bestiality has to be felt. Because the grieving is not enough alone. You have to know how stubborn. And this is why I believe that the ass was chosen. In fact, literally, this is what the Egyptians said in their mysteries. They said that the physical nature is very, very stubborn. And so what we're talking about is the experience of living as an ass and wanting to copulate with a human is a stage that you have to go through in self-recognition before you can be cleansed and purified to undergo the full fruition. All right, this is taking long, isn't it? We'll maybe hold it under 90 minutes. Might go a little over. Again, the king and queen live on the river, and there's the solar and lunar currents. We won't go into that. This time, it's a wet nurse instead of a dry nurse. I don't know the full meaning of being a dry nurse, but I do know the full meaning of the blood is directly transformed into milk in the mammary glands. Whatever is in the blood is going to go into the milk. Everybody knows that about mothers eating a lot of fresh food and having colicky babies. And we're talking then about the nectar of the gods in wet nursing. We'll just pass on that. and come up to telling the dirty jokes. This is also a part of the myth. If you read The Golden Ass of Apuleius, you're going to read, it even would make Shakespeare blush. And Shakespeare gets pretty bawdy, very, very bawdy. In fact, if you know all the innuendos that Shakespeare is making, and Lucian of Apuleius does the same thing, all of those innuendo kinds of bawdiness. And this was the view. They were very modern. They were pre-Christian uptightness. The way the mystery students related to sexuality and the repression of sexuality. They wanted no repression of it. And they brought it out gently. And they brought it out so they could examine it. And the telling of dirty stories and such like that was part of a psychological device, because not only was there wit in it, but in that wit you could see there was something of meaning, and with the double entendre, with the pun, you can see that there's another side, another creative meaning to the sexuality, where if you just say no to sexuality and shove it down, it's not healthy psychologically. The mystery students knew that. And so this is why in the mystery myth, the goddess, in order to break the grief, because you can't have an initiation that's only grief, you have to see the positive side of things also. This is why you have the singing of these dirty poems and Baubo showing her cuteness and such like that, which is sort of like the crack of the universe. That is the opening to the eternal womb from which everything has come. And it's a realization of being shaven. It's a realization of a renewal of creativity, and the fascination in that is what distracts Demeter, the only thing that distracts Demeter out of her terrible grief. And so there's, a reasonable looking into that. Then she's given barley water and mint to drink, and the barley is, as we said before, mercurial, and the mint is Venusian. But the Platonists, for example, claim that this part of the mysteries, Proclus and I think it's Olympidaris, it's just so hard to remember all of the quotes from all of the people who were commentators from the Platonistic point of view, claim that this is the realization of the earthly state. Everything is a mixture. Whereas the Platonists were purists. They wanted everything to be pure, like if they were going to drink alcohol, they'd probably want to drink 100% alcohol and nothing else. Not much of it, but nothing too much, That was on the Greek mystery schools. But for the goddess to have to take in a mixture of barley and water and then have mint thrown in, that was the taking in of a mixture, and it was a recognition of the fact that when we're compounding in the world of the square rather than in the world of the triangle, we're always compounding mixtures and nothing is ever pure. Also, it has to do with barley and mint being put together. It has to do with persuasion. That the barley represents the mercurial type of quality, where things are in intelligence, and Venus represents the mint quality, and it represents the soothing aspect, and it is drinking barley and mint is like being taught the higher kind of logic, the kind that Osiris sang to the world. Remember when Osiris taught the mysteries to the whole world? He did it by singing, because that was much more persuasive. And when the dirty jokes were told, they were told as poems. We might make this all yet. If to make fun of it, to the taking in of this wisdom, as the Prince Abbas does, to make fun of the taking in of this wisdom, to ridicule the mysteries was considered one of the lowest things. And when she turns him into a lizard, this means that this is not turning him into him. It's just a statement of reality. Most curses are that. The curse of Jehovah when he casts Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden is not a curse. If you look at it in the whole way it's written, it's just a statement of reality. This is what you've done, and this is what the consequence of it is. I'm not cursing you. This is the way things are. And he said that he was a crawling kind of beast. Remember, the Isis was very much associated with scorpions. Well, we didn't tell that story, that part of the story with Isis. That's in the main myth, the association with the scorpions. But it's a cold-blooded animal. And a cold-blooded animal means a being that is not capable of generating internal warmth. It's at a lowly state of existence that it has to borrow. And such a one that cannot see the meaning of the persuasive meaning of the mysteries is nothing more than a lizard that scampers here and there and has to borrow its life. And you know what a borrower is. You're somebody that's going into debt, right? And we are all divine debtors until we take the mysteries into us and rise and clear up our debts and become one living beings and such like that. Okay. She tries to immortalize Demofun. She tries to do it by fire. This is a statement. Fire is again associated with the triangle and with the spirit and the quality of trials by fire or of a baptism by fire or in this case a purge by fire is a spiritualization of matter, where everything is burned out of the earth and it is raised up into the heavens. And we're talking about, this is like a play within a play. That when you see, like sunlight comes down and sunlight is taken by the plants and the plants unite it with the earth and make wood out of it. And that is stored up. And then we light a fire and things go back to being like a sun again. And when you're burning things or when you're consuming things, this is like that Prajapati in the creation myths. That is, he creates the cosmos and the cosmos is all mouth and all fire. And the act of creation is the act of consuming. And since there's an infinite potential in the absolute, the whole creative work is a consuming. But in this case, where it is the spiritualization of matter, that is to say that there can be no hesitation. To stop in the middle of the act of initiation, to give up, or to hesitate, or to interrupt, or anything like that is to produce a death. And very often it's a spiritual death. Such that I have a friend that I'm convinced tried to force himself into an initiatory state too early in the past life. And in this life he's taken every kind of drug you can think of. And he's a out and out alcoholic. He's got this tremendous spiritual hunger and he just wants to, when he kicked heroin, he would drive thumbtacks into his thumbs just so he could feel physical pain and not have to think about the psychological pain from the addiction, which was the repressed pain that he was feeling all along that he was trying to dodge and cover up by taking the heroin. And the interruption of the act of burning out the impurities is to try to stop. And, this is why death, which is the same as initiation, only one is involuntary and the other is voluntary. This is why all of the great heroes were, after their death, they were burned. Because nothing of their physical elements was to be left. They were all supposed to be transformed into something spiritual. And that's, and that's what the burning of Demofun is supposed to be. Like you leave a little bit of ash behind that belongs to the earth, and everything that you have taken, the whole process of going through forms and breaking them down and bringing them into states of degeneration and drawing the soul material out is a fiery kind of process. When you make your move, you follow through. That's one of the most important things in the lesson of Demofun, or in this whole process. Psychologically, Freud says that coitus interruptus produces neurosis, which is perfectly true. But it's just a little teeny tiny bit of a much bigger truth. Spiritually, Rudolf Steiner, for example, claims that one of the worst things that you can do if you're trying to become a candidate for the mysteries to be initiated is to start something and then quit. Things that you start, you should follow through on them, because follow through is one of the essential things for psychological health and for the supreme of psychological health, which is spiritual creativity. Okay. Pigs always get the bests and worst of things. They're the ones that are swallowed up into the earth. And actually, we'll talk. Let's skip the pigs. We'll talk about the pigs next time, because they form a big part of the celebration at Elysius. And they were all grazing on the plain, and the plain itself, because of its fertility and because of its openness, was the symbol of heaven, because things could grow there, things that were good and useful. If you look, for example, at the what were they called? The Elysian fields. When you got past, with the dead, some of the dead were in limbo, and some of the dead were in hell, and then the great ones lived on in the Elysian fields. And the Elysian fields to the Platonists were open, fertile plains where things grew. That's all fairly simple. The three kinds of animals that were on the plains, all three were there. First you had the sheep, and the sheep are the dual teeth ones, and they nip foods. This is why in the cowboy movies, the cattlemen are against the sheep herders, because the sheep can eat right down to the crown, and then the pasture is dead after that. Whereas the cow is of a different order. The cow holds it and then tears off the grass with its tongue. So you have the nippers and the tearers, and then you have the pigs, which have no teeth at all, and the only thing they use their tongue for is routing and is swallowing. They're talking about three different kinds of states of consumption. I don't want to go into it because we're way overstayed. I just put a little tiny note in there, and I decided to stay with that. Some other time. Nobody can see the face of Hades because he's wearing his helmet. We're going to come up to the helmet later on. Remember when we come to Perseus, the first hero that we're going to talk, the first heroine that we're going to talk about is in East of the Sun and West of the Moon, and the first hero that we're going to talk about is Perseus. Okay, so I got to keep some things, for the future. I can't try to say everything all in one night. Much as I'd like, I could keep on talking, because when I talk, then I don't have to face all the dark, heavy sides of myself and such. We'll pass on the sun, and go on to Demeter refusing to let things grow. It's interesting, the extremes of the psychology of being in the masculine and feminine bodies. Men when they get into their extremities of moral abjection, get into actual punishment. Women, that is, humans like us that are in women's bodies, when they get into the extreme of their abjection, they withhold. You know, all know the story of the Grecian women. What is that? Lysistrata by Aristophanes. That's one kind of withholding. But in some cases, the women will withhold speech, and they'll withhold even reaction to feeling. You know, classic case of the sadist and the masochist. The sadist is almost certainly a man, and the masochist is almost certainly a woman. And the sadist would beat the woman, and she would feel it in her hand. This is the extremity of torture. So, in the same way, what I'm trying to say is that the feminine is receptivity and information, giving form to things, holding things. And therefore, when we take something and hold it and never let go, is the extremity of that. Whereas the masculine is the projection of life, of vitality, of spirit, and to give more than the receptor can possibly receive is the height of the masculine kind of thing. Okay. Demeter refuses gifts, as the initiate refuses gifts, not because the initiate doesn't want to take gifts because the initiate will look bad. It's just that when you've had a taste of honey, who wants gifts? You know what I mean? If this represents a state of consciousness. When this gift is given to you and that gift is given to you, and you think in terms of objects and identify yourself with an object, I even get scary feelings when I hear people that are into, for example, Pentecostalism. And some of them have the gift of doing this or the gift of doing that. And they how would you say it? I can't think of the word. Cherish isn't the word. Covet. They covet their gifts. And when the gifts are sent to Demeter and she'll have none of them, this means that Demeter knows what's precious. That life, that soul that has been abducted and taken into the underworld rapaciously, is the world, the eternal absolute symbolized as material ignorance rapaciously draws the sun into it. And when the soul comes down into generation through the many stages of evolution, when Demeter realizes that spiritual life is gone, that is you can't have any substitutions. You know what I mean? You can't give somebody gifts for that. Two messengers, we'll just pass on that. So we do know that there are two types of intuition. There's a feminine type of intuition that is associated with Uranus and with the Christ and the life spirit, which is the immediate hit intuition. And then there is the masculine type of intuition that is associated with Neptune, and that is associated with the human spirit, and is associated with intellection, but we'll just pass on that. And then that cryptic message. If gods are immortals, why should they worry if they don't have any worshippers anymore? Zeus sends this message to Hades saying, we will all be undone. And the gods and goddesses have to have worshippers. And they have to have someone to give to. And the reciprocity the union between the gods needing the adoration of the humans that will certainly die if Demeter keeps withholding life. The adoration doesn't mean that they like to be cheered or anything like that, but it is part of their work to uplift, like in the image of God. And the more we have God or the divine before our eyes, the more we rise. This is the story of Dante and Beatrice. Every time he raises to another level in the spiritual worlds, as he's going through the hells and then through purgatory and up through the heavens, every time he makes a rise, he rises by looking at the face of Beatrice, and it lifts him to another level. And the service of the gods is to share the creation, and the way they do that is to, at the stage when a person is evolving rather than involving, is by looking at the gods lifts us out of our earthly condition. And so the gods need us to fulfill their part of the creative work. They have to have us looking at them to be uplifted, just as much as we need them for our continued existence or for continuing on that path that must not be interrupted. Okay. Kor refuses bread, and bread is the cooked seed. It is the cooked grain. And it is the most humble, it's something of nature that has been made even easier for humans to take in. It's sort of like a pablum that's given to us because we're so weak. And the Kor refusing even a crust of bread indicates that she's refusing to take the human state. But we'll come back to that next time when we talk about the mysteries more. But she does eat 7 seeds of a pomegranate. And this is unusual. The pomegranate was one of the symbols of the feminine organs because it was filled with seeds. And if you look at the bottom, that funny open bottom of the pomegranate was like a vagina, and it was supposed, splitting open. You could see the seeds issuing out one after another. But the seeds, I think, has a different meaning here. She ate 7 seeds on her journey to the underworld. Oops. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Each one for each of the planetary spheres. And those represent the different qualities we have developed in our descent into becoming human. We have 4 seed atoms that relate to the physical, the etheric, the desire, and the mental nature. Then we have 3 germs, which are not actually like seed qualities, but 3 germs of spiritual qualities. And so the taking of the 7 seeds that starts this whole cycle, this is to show that this is not just a one-time only thing, but by taking the seeds in until they're all united to being one central seed, I don't want to get too far away here, represents that we have become something. We have a character that has attributes and values. And those attributes and values are geminal. And we will continue, the commitment is there even before the pronunciation of the thing, she's yours if she hasn't eaten anything of the food of the dead. The whole act of descending into the underworld in itself, into the world that we live in right now, is an act of taking the seeds. All right, I don't want to continue too much longer because we're getting a little late here. want to talk a little bit about the grief of Demeter when she finds out that she got her daughter back, but is also going to lose her. That is a realization. Do you know how moments go? They have a great joy and a great sorrow in them all at the same time. And when you neutralize an experience, you feel both the joy and the sorrow at the same time. When you have the spiritual awakening to something you've done or something you've not done, you realize the past and the future meet in that event, or cause and consequence meet in that event, or heaven and earth meet in that event. And that's the kind of experience that, you know what I'm trying to say, in order to have a spiritual experience, I would recommend, there's a little 10 or 12 page thing by Rudolf Steiner called Prayer. And it took me, I read the thing and it didn't say anything to me at all. And then about a half a year to a year later, it just dawned on me what it was talking about. And it's talking about that total experience of past and present meeting in the moment of prayer. And as an element of all prayer, that seems to be a full and thorough, complete moment. And that's sort of like, that's the state of Demeter at that point. Let's look a little bit, let's make a chart here. We're going to have one chart about the feminine characters. Oh, this is wet. I don't know how this is going to go on. Not so bad. We'll look a little bit at the culture of the times. We have Kor, Persephone, and we have Hecate. This is Maiden, Queen Bee, Crone. These are common things that we're going to run into in a lot of myths as we go through. I'll just mention them here tonight because we're just getting started. This is green corn. Again, corn. All right. Ripe corn. Harvested corn. Where it all becomes dried and crinkled. These are if this is an imaginative process, and the Eleusinian mysteries were a process of developing seership, because everybody had visions in the Eleusinian mysteries. That is pretty much universally agreed upon. That has to do with the preparation and the development of the imagination. And the development and preparation of the imagination is seen by following the qualities and the character of the moon as it develops. This core represents the new moon, where everything is fresh, it's innocent. It's like picking flowers. The moon has just been cleansed itself by fire by being with the sun. Then Persephone represents the full moon. When the moon comes into all of its own power, it's resplendent, it rules over all of the earth, but it also has that quality of terribleness. It has that destructiveness that is associated with full moons. And all of these now, mind you, are stages of imagination. An imagination doesn't happen all at once. When you develop an image in your consciousness, it isn't born whole. It's first very almost invisible, and then it congeals, and then it becomes very full, but it's terrible when it's full because it's deathly. Because the imagination at that point, as an object, can overtake you. and it can take on a world of its own. It's like being in front of a huge big knife or being on the edge of a cliff and thinking that you're going to fall over or that knife is going to cut you. The imagination takes over and it has a terror of its own so that the meaning is lost. And then finally, you have an old moon. And as the form and the glory of the imagination passes away, then the inner meaning of that generated imagination is developed. And so when it is talking about the two states of Persephone, of Cora Persephone and her eventual strong association, if you look in all of the myths of the underworld, there's a strong association of Persephone with Hecate, the three stages of a woman's development. Because even sexually, a woman is a maiden for quite a bit of her life, and she doesn't come into her full sexuality until in the center of it. And later on, she becomes the wise woman, just like the corn that's all shriveled and dried up, but it's useful then. It has a great deal of wisdom to it. So if we're talking about the development of an imaginative process, we're talking about the three stages of the divine feminine indicated in the moon. The gifts that are given, number one, are the mysteries. And if we have fallen into generation and even degeneration, there is no greater gift than that which frees us. I guess I don't want to talk about Asclepius because we're way too long. I guess I don't even want to talk about beans. Maybe we'll talk about beans next time. And the fig tree comes back to us again. Mind you, there's a fig tree and the story of the destruction of a fig tree in the gospel. That's the one mystery myth we're not going to talk about because I'm incapable of doing what I want to do with it. Because each of the gospels of the Bible is an initiation myth. And all of these myths that we find in the other mysteries are found in the Bible. They're found in a different way. We'll talk some about that next time we get together again. But the greatest of these gifts, then, is the gift of the mysteries. And the king of the mysteries is Triptolemus. He's given the cart drawn by serpents. And mind you, this is in the time of the Tarian age, and so the esoteric side of the serpent, of Taurus, is the serpent. And like when Heracles undergoes his initiation as a child, the serpents lick his ears clean, and then he can hear the voices of the animals and the voices of nature. The serpents are none other than the initiatory priests like the Ophites among the Gnostics and such like that. I guess that's enough. And probably is, as usual, too much. So next time we'll talk about the mysteries, and we'll try to do at least a triple take and maybe a quadruple take on looking at the essence of this mystery on three or four levels, so that we can understand how it appeals to different sides of the character. There's one interpretation we will not go through this time because I feel it's done much better when we talk about Orpheus and Bacchus and such like that. Thank you very much. This has been the height of my week.